getting fired was actually one of the turning points in your career, and that actually
Yes.
led you to start GIMBHI.
I was at a ratings agency. There's not that many out there. It's the one that's not S&P. I was in the office late one day and I found that
Welcome to Low to Grow, the podcast transforming life's toughest moments into opportunity for growth. I'm Annie, a Forbes Under 30 technology founder whose entrepreneurship journey ran parallel to a mental health awakening. In every episode, I sit down with inspiring individuals and delve into how they managed to turn their personal or professional challenges into opportunities for growth. If you're facing uncertainty in your life, feeling down, or simply need a kick of inspiration to keep moving forward, this is your space for the honest and uplifting conversations that you will want to hear. Hit follow so you never miss an episode, and let's dive in. Today's guest is Shiv Bhavnani, a healthcare investor, founder, and one of the sharpest minds shaping the future of mental health. He is a partner at the venture capital firm Evil VC, which backs early-stage startups that are bridging mental health and human performance. Now, Shiv is also the founder and CEO of GIMBHI, a research and consulting firm providing insights into the healthcare space that has already featured in places like Nature, Axios, and Business Insider. As a global thought leader, have developed a thesis on generative AI in psychiatry and is now writing a book on AI in mental health. Now, Shiv is clearly someone who really gets both the science and the systems behind innovation. But today, he is joining the Low to Grow podcast to talk a bit about his own experiences as a young professional, about big career pivots, finding work that matters to him, and also what excites him about the future of mental health. So Shiv, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Annie. That's a really incredible introduction. So it's very generous. Thank you. And it's awesome to be on the podcast today.
Yep, excited for us to be having this conversation. So Shiv, before we start, who do you think will benefit the most from listening to our conversation today?
Honestly, I think it's just anybody who's trying to find something that they want to do with their career that more aligns with them. So basically, anybody who's looking for a change and anybody who's really thinking about a career that resonates with what they deeply want to do.
Wonderful. Excited to delve into it with you. So, let's just start with the heart of it. Why mental health?
Well, yeah, so I could definitely talk for 2 hours about that at least. But I mean, there's so many reasons. I'll first start off with the concept that I think when we hear people's stories and people tell their stories, a lot of the times it's a linear narrative. This happened, and then that drove me to that. Maybe that is the truth for some people, but I think that for me, life and pretty much everything has been way more of a spiral. So it's circling around something and getting closer and then coming back to the same spot, but you're closer. And I think my whole life, from when I was in high school, middle school, I've been fascinated by the mind, psychology, consciousness, spiritual practices. That was kind of what drew me into the world of specifically psychology. When you think about problems to solve, there have been, me personally and people in my family have struggled with mental health challenges. And when I look at the world and look at, what problems are important to solve, I'm not saying it's objectively right, but I feel like the mind is really it's the gateway to everything. It's the software of humanity. We all operate using this tool we call the mind, or you can simplify it to the brain if you believe in just physical substrate. It just seems like, wow, all of humanity is really through this filter of the mind, and we still don't understand it. People in my life struggle with mental illness, and I came to the conclusion that the reason why we don't understand the mind and the brain is because we didn't prioritize it as a society, like putting in the resources and time. That's kind of why mental health for me.
So interesting. And from your position as someone who invests into really early stage startups that are building at that intersection of mental health, brain health, and also human performance, what are some of the things that really excite you about the future?
I mean, so many things. Like, everything from access to mental health care is something that I pay attention to. It's like if we let's say we develop some new treatment, but it costs $1 million and only 5 people in the world can get it. Is that progress? I would not consider that progress. I mean, it is one aspect of progress in the kind of treatment efficacy world, but I think we have things that do work. Access is a big problem in mental health care. There are some companies which seem, maybe somewhat boring on the cover of it, but what they're doing is helping connect providers and people who really need care, usually through the very complicated Byzantine structure of government payers. So things like Medicaid. So I would say one area is expanding access. That's what interests me, and I would say AI in terms of specifically diagnosis and reconceptualization of like mental health disorder classification, not AI necessarily in terms of AI agents. That's interesting to me, but less so than using AI to basically redefine what mental illness is and identifying different types of biomarkers for mental illness. Because I think today what we think of as depression is probably 16 different disorders, probably overlapping with our definition of anxiety, or that's just a random example, but our classifications aren't necessarily real. They're kind of made up.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is using AI tools to, I guess, more effectively segment the different classes of mental disorders so that people can be treated more effectively based on what subset that they have.
Yes, exactly. That process will involve rewriting the DSM. People always ask the question, is that practical? I think that ultimately it'll be necessary for us. We'll hit a roadblock in terms of how effective our treatments can be without new classifications of disorders.
What does DSM stand for?
The Diagnostic Manual. Basically, it's a manual of mental health disorders, kind of like gold standard for diagnosis.
Okay, understood. You've talked a bit about the diagnostic portion. What about using AI tools in the treatment of certain mental health conditions?
Yeah, so we've seen AI therapists, as everybody knows. That's kind of, or maybe I'm just in a little bubble, but I feel like there's been talk of AI therapists as of the last year or so. So that's like, a autonomous agent that potentially treats people. You have clinical decision support tools for providers and therapists and any type of other mental health professional in the space. I think it's definitely interesting, and there's a huge need and demand for it. If you think about how many people are using ChatGPT or any kind of consumer LLM for emotional and mental health support, it's already there. It's that people are using it, tens of millions of people are using those tools for mental health support. Now, you can argue, is that right? Is that going to be effective? That's another question, but people are using it. There's big demand for it. There's a very interesting case for AI to be used directly as a treatment, like some type of treatment agent. But like I said, I think diagnosis is actually in kind of redefining mental and brain health issues and disorders. I think there's huge potential there.
Which organizations, in your view, are leading that development and also driving the end use of using AI in diagnostics for mental health?
The diagnosis front, that's still largely being done by universities. And, there are definitely some companies that have worked on identifying blood-based, neural-based, or even digital behavior-based biomarkers for mental illness. But it seems to me, from the outside, it seems like it's tough to do that without making sure what you're looking for is homogeneous. Like, let's say depression, for example. There's been some very interesting companies that have worked on voice-based biomarkers for depression and anxiety. One of those companies is Kintsugi. Another company is Themia. And I think they've actually been somewhat successful and made some serious progress there. But I think the more specific we can classify illness, then, finding a biomarker for a very specific presentation of something is much potentially easier. It's chicken or egg, obviously, too. In terms of AI agents like chatbots for therapy, there have been a huge proliferation of these companies. There's been dozens and dozens, and kind of the jury is out. We have yet to see who will emerge as a winner in this space, or even from a clinical perspective.
Understood. I want to take a step back. Where did you start your career?
I started my career in the financial services world. My first job out of school was working at Morgan Stanley on a sales desk selling a kind of complex product to banks and insurance companies. Just a far cry from the world of mental health and healthcare innovation. When I was in college, extremely interested in the mind and the brain. I started off as a neuroscience major, actually, and through a kind of rough year for me when I was 19, I failed out of almost all of my courses in one semester, which were very heavy on neuroscience. So my advisor was like, well, listen, like you're going to have to take potentially an extra semester. It's probably not possible with like the course offerings of different labs and things to finish it in time. He was like, well, why don't you just do it for fun and you don't have to major in that? And that's what I ended up doing. That kind of sent me in this interesting path because I substituted the neuroscience major with an econ major, and it sent me down this path in finance. And I never really intended to go down the path, but what I was doing was intellectually stimulating enough. I was working with structured credit, so highly financially engineered products, effectively, collateralized loan obligations specifically. I worked in that for a few years across a few different firms, and I realized like this is so divorced from reality because it's pretty abstract what we're doing. I just felt very far from my personal mission. I was about to kind of go deeper in the space, and I got an offer from an investment fund to go work as a credit investor. And I decided to change my path, and I started GIMBHI. I started a newsletter covering the entire mental health startup innovation ecosystem.
You mentioned getting fired was actually one of the turning points in your career, and that actually
Yes,
led you to start GIMBHI. Could you share a bit more about what led up to that event?
I was at a ratings agency, which I won't name, but there's not that many out there. It's the one that's not S&P. At the time, I was rating and doing research on structured credit, like I mentioned before, a product called collateralized loan obligations. At the time, there were all these new startups coming out that were lending to individuals. It was called marketplace lending or P2P lending. So they're making these kind of unsecured loans, or it was a person making the unsecured loan. I found that basically as the industry matured, a few Wall Street firms started to buy the loans, package them, and then sell them as bonds. Very similar to a mortgage-backed security or collateralized loan obligation, very similar structures. I was in the office late one day, and I was just reading obsessively as I do, and I was reading through some of the filings for these securities. And I found that there was no validation of the information on the loans anywhere in this life cycle of originating the loan, selling it into an SPV, and then selling bonds based on that. Another way to put it, like the nutritional facts on the bonds were fake. There's basically zero proof for that. I brought it up internally, and I'm like, wait a second, I just watched The Big Short, the financial crisis when I started a career that was very close in the rear view mirror. A lot of folks had lost their jobs during that. And of course, the whole world went through a global financial crisis. I brought it up internally and I said, hey, we're vetting and rating these securities, and we don't really bring this up as a risk, as an issue at least. I'm not saying to totally condemn everything, but just hey, the originator of the loan is basically saying all the information on these loans could be totally fake, and we have no liability there. And then the structure of the bond was not doing any kind of due diligence on the portfolio of loans to validate any of this information. So huge risk. If it got bigger, if this became a systemic problem, which it didn't, but if it did, that'd be a serious issue. And even just for any of the investors in these bonds. Long story short, I wrote a whole research paper on it internally. I circulated it. However, the financial institutions that were doing these securitizations were very large, and they had very close relationships with the ratings agency. It goes back to the age-old incentive misalignment in the ratings world. But they kind of refused to publish it. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, we could just mention this as a paragraph in a report. Like, I don't need this to be a whole thing. And there was almost like zero receptivity to it. So I usually do. I like to shed light on things, be transparent, and do what's right. And I published it with a large news outlet and then an industry trade publication. I said these are my opinions. They don't reflect anything having to do with the firm I work at or anything like that. But very swiftly, I was called into the office and told to leave. I'm glad I did it. I don't have zero regrets. Doing the right thing, you can never regret it. But it did make me think of like, wait a second, maybe I need to actually do what I originally kind of conceived of as my career, working in the world of mental and brain health innovation. But at this point, I have no background in neuroscience or mental health. So what do? I do what I know best is and start publishing market research on the space, covering all the investors and startups in the space. Not right after that, but a couple years after that, after I'd toyed with the idea, I jumped in.
Wow. That's an amazing story about how you actually went back to your roots of neuroscience and your interest in brain and mental health whilst doing a detour. Super interesting. Thanks for sharing your story, Shiv. When you were recounting it, you made it sound very streamlined and almost quite matter of fact. Getting fired, no one likes that. And then kind of deciding how you're going to re-enter the workforce after getting fired, that's also really difficult. For any of our audience members who might be going through a similar thing, what advice would you give them?
I actually found a job, honestly, after that, like very quickly. I think the bigger question was that the right job after that? Or should I have, started GIMBHI earlier? I think I would have liked to start GIMBHI earlier than I did. And I was thinking about it at that time, but I just didn't see commercial path to actually kind of making it something that pays the bills and that you can make a living off of. I went back into the finance world after that. I would tell people if you're going through a tough time like that, I would really take the opportunity to reconsider what you want to do and what you really want to do, because this could be a gift of some time and space to rethink what you want to do. Really use that gift of redirection. Sometimes it's like, oh, you're doing exactly what you want to do and then you get fired. That's one thing. But if you're, not totally aligned with what you're doing, you're leaving energy on the table. There's a lot of friction and energy loss through doing something you don't really want to do.
Hmm. I like that. Earlier, when you mentioned the bigger question for you was, should you have started GIMBHI earlier? For how long was GIMBHI in your mind before you actually started actioning and building it?
Probably way too long, like around 3 years. I don't know why. It was an idea, and then I was taking it more seriously. Then I was actually thinking about a business model. So I started to study for the psychology GRE because I was thinking about going into a master's and PhD program in psychology after I got fired. So basically that's something I started to do. So maybe it wasn't the idea of GIMBHI specifically, but it was in the world of mental health innovation.
Okay, interesting. And could you explain a bit more about, exactly what GIMBHI does at the moment?
We're the Global Institute of Mental and Brain Health Investment. Our mission is to drive more capital and resources into mental health and mental health innovation. My diagnosis of the problem that, like, wait a second, why don't we have enough treatments? Why has this therapeutic area been significantly underfunded for decades? So I started to look into these problems. I found that it's not, a lot of people say, oh, it's so complex. I think it was less that and more that as a society, we didn't really prioritize mental health. There's a lot of stigma. I think humans in general prioritize things they can see. You could see a tumor. You can't totally see a mental illness. You can see, oh, wow, this brain looks differently than this brain, but it's just harder to see. So I think that in a sense was deprioritized. Then you have stigma, huge amounts of stigma around mental illness. We track the entire mental health innovation ecosystem. We track funding and basically trends. That's how we started. And from there, investors, investment funds, angel investors, nonprofits, anybody that had any interest in mental health innovation started hiring us as a consulting group. We would work on different engagements, everything from strategy to standing up an innovation arm for nonprofits to investment work and due diligence on startups. So basically anything that involves mental health innovation specifically. Say the functional areas we get hired for are fundraising, strategy, business development, and recruiting. People want to know what's happening in the mental health innovation landscape. It's changing very quickly.
I'm curious, when you first started GIMBHI, what did that operation look like? Was it just you, or did you have, other founding partners that you brought on from the very beginning?
I was the main founding partner. It was just me at the beginning, but then when we started to get consulting engagements and have revenue, then we started to hire folks. But yeah, at the beginning, it was just me before AI, scouring the internet, making a big database of every single company, doing countless calls. I was doing over 20, sometimes 30 calls per week with founders and investors in the space. It was a really busy time, and it's cool to be here today.
For me, it's really, cool to see you grow GIMBHI into almost like a international organization. So I know you do kind of events and those activities in the US as well as in the UK. Quite curious, if you had to summarize the biggest change in mental health related funding that happened over the past year, what would it be?
A few things. The exuberance from 2020 to 2022 is significantly subdued. There was this real euphoria and leading to a lot of investments in the space and some investments that probably shouldn't have been made. That's a large trend. AI advancements are basically rocking and transforming every single industry, and mental health is no exception there. Just interest in AI. We're seeing a little less pre-seed funding, and that's where, as a partner at Evia Venture Capital, that's really a privilege to be funding pre-seed companies. There's a lot more trends. We'll be putting out a report probably in a few months. That's kind of what I see in a nutshell for the broader audience.
Thank you. That's interesting. And I know it was a difficult question because it's such a broad category. You mentioned your work with Evil VC. If you had to pick one of your current portfolio companies that is really, really exciting for you, which one would it be and why?
It's a really good question. I mean, it's like kind of picking your favorite child. It's tough. This is an interesting one. It's called Third Space Therapy. Third Space delivers therapy and mental health care for Medicaid patients. On first look, this doesn't seem that novel or interesting, but there is a severe shortage. If there's a general provider shortage for mental health care, that's significantly more pronounced in the Medicaid population. And the reason is Medicaid reimbursement for mental health care is relatively low, and operational complexity, costs of compliance are high. It's just operationally harder to serve Medicaid patients because of all of the government requirements, and reimbursement's low. You have a bunch of providers who say, I don't take Medicaid, I don't take Medicaid, I don't take Medicaid. And that's a shame because there are folks in that population who really need mental health care, and it just doesn't really make sense from a financial perspective for some providers to take Medicaid. Third Space is basically expanding this access and making the model work by streamlining a lot of the compliance and operational complexity that comes with serving Medicaid. So a little less exciting. It's not like a robot that can talk to you, but it's really having a positive impact on the world.
And this goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of our conversation, which is the companies might not look very exciting on the outside, but they're doing the core, almost like bread and butter work that is needed in order to make mental health care more accessible to more people.
Yeah, and I think there are definitely exciting companies as well. It's just that I think if you really want to make lasting change in healthcare, you have to work with the system. A lot of our portfolio companies do that extremely well.
Understood. With your VC lens, what are some of the key things that you look for in a startup that might come to you looking for investment?
It's a really good question. There are so many things in terms of like the problem they're solving and the solution, but like putting that aside because that's very industry specific. I would say for founders, we actually have a kind of complex founder assessment process at Evio. But something that we look for, and I specifically look for, is problem obsession. Founders who know the problem in and out, like very, very obsessed. They know every groove, and it's like knowing every secret way into the castle. Like you really studied it, and it comes across that your obsession is not just like mission obsession being like, oh, I hate this exists and I really want to solve it. It's that passion gets alchemized into real knowledge or attempts at gaining knowledge too, like just mental obsession with the problem. And I think that's always pretty palpable. See a lot of founders who aren't, and I'm like, well, this is going to be a long journey, and if you're not obsessed with the problem and not emotionally obsessed, I think that's the first step of like actually, being driven and passionate about the issue. But does that crystallize into action and like learning about it in every way you can? If I want to see people who find ways to get information where there is no information. If you're really obsessed with the problem, you're going to find the info, you're going to figure it out. Oh, I talked to 8 people. I found them. I got introductions, referrals to these people who introduced me to them. And then I taught, or, just when I see that resourcefulness and kind of intensity about the problem, that's a good thing.
If you had to give an estimate, what percentage of founders that you do come across or hear pitches from actually have that founder obsession?
But I think the bar of probably like 1 out of 10.
Interesting, because the first thing that came into my head was the stat, which is VC firms generally expect 1 out of 10 of their investments to become a unicorn. So I think it's interesting that's the same stat there as well. Hmm.
Yeah. And, that's one aspect, right? If you could be really obsessed with the problem, but we know, let's say this industry, and we're like, that solution doesn't, we don't think that approach is correct for that problem. Or we think that this is not totally scalable won't achieve venture scale. So there's a hundred other reasons an investment might not be a fit for a fund. But in terms of that kind of like more behavioral problem obsession, yeah, I would say maybe 1 out of 10.
At either you have a specific type of founder analysis. I read somewhere online that either you assess how well founders know themselves, which is a big factor in whether or not the firm decides to invest. Could you expand a bit about what that actually means?
Our founder assessment process is pretty long and complex, but yeah, self-awareness is something that I think we definitely look for. What do we mean by self-awareness? My take is that it's important as a founder to know, like this is a cliche, but it's true, to know what you're good at, know what you're bad at, to basically have a really clear idea of your own strengths and weaknesses. Because only if you understand and acknowledge what you're bad at can you plug the holes. But if there's no awareness of that, it's very tough to do that. It is self-awareness with respect to one's strengths and weaknesses when it comes to operating.
Thanks for sharing much. Going to move on to our podcast staple. What is one thing that you believe will allow more people to have better mental health?
I might break the rules here and say 2 things because I can't choose between these. I think one is just sleep. It sounds so obvious, but for years I would have ambient light in my bedroom. That totally just destroys your sleep. Like blackout curtains, it's got to be, you know, it's really got to be pitch black if you can. And I mean, maybe yeah, I think that's important. So good sleep. For me, what disturbed it was light and temperature. It's like, it's got to be cold and dark to sleep well. So I would say that, and then mental health, and I'm talking about just generally staying mentally healthy is not just kind of reflecting in your mind, but running that self reflection via verbalizing it by writing it or recording a journal, doing some type of structured self reflection. Be like, why did I do that? Why did I think that? Why did I feel that? And ask those questions and get answers versus just running towards the next thing in your life.
Shiv, it's been a pleasure to have you on the Low to Grow podcast.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure being here. So thank you, Annie.
That's a wrap for today's episode of the Low to Grow podcast. If it resonated with you, leave a review and hit follow to help more people to find important conversations. Keep growing and see you next time.